Liz O'Brien is a principal social scientist in the Society and Environment Research Group at Forest Research. Her research explores human-forest relationships with a particular focus on the cultural ecosystem benefits of trees and woodlands, including a strong focus on the health and well-being benefits of engagement with trees and woodlands, physical, mental, and social. Leads a 5-year program of research on the societal benefits of trees and forest for forest research. She has explored the impact of COVID-19 on engagement with nature, as well as has also led the evaluation of the active forest program for Forestry England since 2014. Liz is also involved in interdisciplinary research projects and collaborates with scientists in many parts of the world. Please, let's give a warm welcome to Liz O'Brien.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm just going to start sharing my screen then. Hopefully people can see that. So thanks very much for that introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. So what I'd like to talk about this afternoon is around soundscapes, and also touch on a project that focused on social science and climate change and the biodiversity crises. As Anna said, I'm part of the Society and Environment Research Group at Forest Research, and we're a team of over 20 social scientists from a range of different disciplinary backgrounds. And one of our key themes over the last couple of decades has been around the health and well-being benefits of forests and trees and wider nature, and sounds have come into that, in a bit. But not in a big way at the moment. But I'd like to also talk about the kind of ecotones network and also the Access project. So my talk will focus on these 3 kind of key areas. We've focused on health and well-being quite a bit within forest research over many years. And I'd like to touch on where some of our research has kind of focused on sounds. And then I'll talk a bit about the ecotones network that ran for 18 months and finish off by talking about the Access project. So research on links between kind of nature and health and well-being in terms of the senses tend to have focused on aesthetic and visual focus, and existing evidence suggests that, biotic sounds, sounds from wildlife such as birds, animals, insects, and abiotic sounds from wind, rain, water, rustling leaves, they can have a positive impact on people both physiologically and psychologically. And there's also quite a lot of evidence about the negative effects of noise on people and the impact that has on their mental and physical well-being. But more needs to be done really on the positive effects of nature, nature soundscapes, and how they might be kind of researched, but also put into practice. And I think there's less research on how potentially soundscapes might connect people to the natural environment. And by soundscapes, I'm meaning, the acoustic environment as perceived by people in different contexts. And sounds can be also an indicator of a healthy or degraded environment. And UNESCO's got a charter to promote awareness of sounds and environmental health. So within the Society and Environment Research Group at Forest Research, we've carried out quite a range of work over the last couple of decades around health and well-being. And that's been involved in a whole range of things. So we started with conferences trying to raise the debate about the importance of this. Then we went on to carry out kind of reviews of existing evidence. We've carried out primary research, but also we've got involved in monitoring and evaluating a range of kind of health and wellbeing interventions. And I mentioned one of those that I've been involved in for quite a long time, the Active Forest Programme, partnership between Sport England and Forestry England. And we've also been involved in EU cost action, so that's collaboration of scientific and technical research, so working with partners across the EU, but also internationally. And in our research that we've undertaken, sounds have come up in our work, particularly in our qualitative research. So one of our projects was focusing on peri-urban woodlands and the impact impacts on those woodlands on people's health and well-being. And we were talking about the kind of senses, and we found that in terms of kind of sounds that were appreciated, people talked quite a lot about bird sound in particular, but they also mentioned kind of, the rustling of the leaves in the trees, crunchy leaf sounds in autumn, the noise of walking on different kind of footpath surfaces. And also they kind of touched on the lack of sound. So the peace and quiet that you can get from the forest environment, and how trees can block out even quite nearby traffic sound, or help to block it out. So helping people really to kind of feel away from the built environment. And also people have talked about hearing the sounds of others. So other people enjoying themselves, particularly, for example, children laughing. Another project that we had focused on kind of Lyme disease and risk perception. And that also, we went out into a forest environment to talk to people about the sort of positive and negative aspects of the forest environment, before then talking about some of the risks that might be associated with being in a forest. And again, sounds came up, and it was kind of similar things around kind of rustling of leaves, birdsong, the reduction in traffic noise, and the lack of sound. So, forests being perceived as peaceful and quite calming places. We've got colleagues in forest research who are working at the moment in a collaboration with the Bat Conservation Trust. So they're looking at how to incorporate monitoring of bat sounds into the National Forest Inventory. And the NFI, as it's called, is kind of a detailed survey of woodlands in Britain. And because it happens repeatedly, that you can monitor change over time. So they're wanting to kind of collect data on bats because they're valuable indicators of forest ecosystem services and natural capital. And in the pilot project, they've been hearing sounds from 7 different bat species. So these are some of the projects, not all of the projects in forest research, that kind of touched a bit on sounds. But I'd like to go on now to talk about the ecotones network and introduce that. So this was funded by the UK research, UKRI. And it's a collaboration between scientists within the UK and within South Korea. And what we were trying to do in the project, the network project, was really to explore ways to kind of communicate environmental issues through soundscapes of trees, and how to connect people to trees and forests through sounds. And the project was led by Amanda Bailey, who's a professor of music at Bath Spa University. The network involved a kind of series of workshops, both virtual and face-to-face, and it touched on a number of key themes. So we talked about, music and the senses and movement, about health and well-being benefits of forests and trees and the wider natural environment. We talked about education and learning and connecting people, particularly children, with the natural environment. And with learning about what is happening in the natural environment. And in terms of people in the network, I think there's about 15 of us from, arts and humanities, natural sciences, social sciences, so a variety of different disciplinary backgrounds. And we did have some face-to-face meetings. So some of us were lucky enough to go to South Korea, to the World Forestry Congress in 2022, I think it was. And we also went to a forest therapy centre in Yeongju, which is on the outskirts of Seoul. And then some of the South Koreans came over to this country. We went to different parts of Britain, inviting kind of different speakers and discussing kind of soundscapes. And then some colleagues in the network also ran a number of sessions at the Timber Festival last year. So the network was really about evidence sharing. It's about undertaking activities that helped us to focus on sounds and think about kind of research questions around sounds, and also how we might incorporate sounds into practice. So our workshops started with kind of evidence sharing, and I'll just share a few things. We shared quite a lot. One of the network members, Zhang Khan, is an acoustic soundscape professor. And he was highlighting that in terms of kind of psychological or subjective evaluations of soundscapes, there's quite a large amount of investigations have taken place. And they've focused on things like, the range of spaces and functions, from, indoor spaces to outdoor spaces. They've looked at sound sources, from industrial sounds to natural sounds. And they've looked at kind of people and people in different countries, different contexts, and how their sound impacts them. And this figure is just from some research that they did a number of years ago, asking people about favourite or less favoured sounds. Potentially unsurprisingly, water and birds came out on top, and things around cars came out at the bottom. With climate change, there's going to be a range of changes in the environment, and this will kind of lead to changes in biodiversity, urban morphology, as well as cultural changes. And that's going to affect sound sources, potentially sound propagation, sound preferences. So, for example, it's been shown that, sounds from water features, bird songs, the sound preferences differ significantly with different climate and cultural conditions. Some recent research looking at sound intervention in an urban park in China, exploring whether natural sounds actually kind of aid or enhance social interaction, and finding that there was in the natural sound intervention, as opposed to traffic sounds or no sound, there was a higher proportion of people participating together in group social interactions and spending a bit more time on that social interaction. So, what is kind of going on there? Quite an interesting finding. I was sharing evidence around the kind of physiological benefits of forests, green spaces, and these will show reduced risk in a wide range of kind of physical morbidities, but also forests can lower things like blood pressure, cortisol levels, pulse rate, and suppress the sympathetic nervous system, so kind of fight and flight response. And quite a few studies on this have taken place in Asia. And I think quality of the vegetation, the size of nature areas matters, but there still needs to be more evidence on that. And there's some evidence that natural sounds can also improve health outcomes in terms of things like reduced blood pressure and also reduced cortisol levels, which are a stress marker. Then in terms of kind of psychological benefits, green spaces can influence positive emotions. They can decrease stress, fatigue, reduce a cognitive load, improve people's attention and feelings of vitality. There's some recent work exploring activity in the amygdala, with an experiment where people walked in the forest for an hour and then they walked in an urban environment for an hour, showing that there was decreased activity after a walk in the forest, suggesting that nature can kind of restore people from kind of stress. So there's a kind of a whole range of kind of benefits and things that we've kind of highlighted in our evidence sharing as a network. And then we went on to kind of undertaking a range of activities. So we went out to engage with sounds, and we got involved in listening to kind of vegetation and trees. Colleague here is using a device to capture sounds, and the rest of us are listening to those. But then we took a time to focus on sounds ourselves. And some of our colleagues in the network are also working with school children, creating kind of hydrophones and putting those into water to kind of collect sounds under water and get children to think about, what sort of sounds they might hear beneath the water. Our musicians in the network also used kind of music to express sound, and then got us to engage in activities to express sounds ourselves by using our voices or our movements, and then also gathering some kind of natural objects to make our own sounds, and then bringing us together to share those sounds and then do them kind of collectively in a sort of composition. I mentioned that we went out to South Korea. So we visited the World Forestry Congress in Seoul, And then as part of that, we also visited the Korean National Institute of Forest Science Research, and they're carrying out some sound, particularly looking at bird sounds and what sort of changes and adaptations are being made in those sounds that have been brought about by environmental change and urban development. And I think from what I've heard also, sometimes in Seoul, they kind of play bird sound in the urban environment due to the lack of bird song in the city. We had quite a strong focus on kind of health and well-being as well. In South Korea, it's quite a densely populated country. It's quite a small country, but we learned that the South Koreans consider engagement with forest right throughout kind of people's lives. And they've designated healing forests, and they think about forest right through from birth through to burials. But they have all these healing forests with a range of programs that are run by for people with a variety of conditions, run by forest therapy instructors. And they've got programs for hypertension, depression, cancer. Some of these include kind of music therapy. And the focus is really on tailored activities, and sometimes people stay for a week. For people focusing on, well, facing financial difficulties, they can get a forest welfare voucher, which covers part of the accommodation costs and therapy costs. So the Forest Therapy Centre at Yeongju is this picture that you can see with a building and then wooded hillside in the background. And they were thinking about ways in which to incorporate sound into some of the activities that they do, some of the therapy activities. When the South Koreans came over to this country, we went to a number of areas and had workshops, but one of them was up in Glasgow. And we went to the Botanic Gardens in Glasgow, and colleagues on the network who are artists, Tim and Reiko Collins, they showed us their piece called Plein Air. So that's a French expression referring to kind of creating art in the outdoors. And they've got quite an interest in technology as a tool to kind of interface with bio events, and they wanted to kind of explore photosynthesis and transpiration, and they gathered data from leaves and then created sounds with the live input from those leaves. So they worked with a kind of specialist, a sound specialist, and they've created this album from that artwork, and they've toured it in a number of places and a number of conferences. So as a network, we got involved in considering the gathering of sounds and the creation of sounds and listening to sounds. So sounds can be gathered that, you know, indicate the health of the forest, for example, or that contribute to the restoration of people who are visiting forests. Or sounds can be gathered of favourite places to provide memories. They can be created through gathering objects in the forest. So, you know, you can think about forest school, something like that would be, you know, quite exciting for children. You can create sound maps of your local places, exploring change over time, or create kind of sonic compositions through creative activities. And then, you know, listening to sounds has become important, and, you know, we can focus on that. There's things like Tweet for the Day. Often there are kind of nature trails going out to listen to the dawn chorus. We can also think about, you know, ways in which we slow down through things like mindfulness, and focus on kind of deep listening to forest sounds and what that's telling us about, you know, our senses and what we, how we experience the surrounding kind of forest environment. And then nature sounds, you know, they're often used in different places. Sometimes you might not expect them. So they're used in hospitals sometimes. I think Alderhay Hospital in Liverpool is a key one, a children's hospital where they've used bird sound to kind of really kind of reduce stress in children. Sounds have been used in schools, in airports, natural sounds, petrol stations to kind of calm people or make the experience a bit more enjoyable. And in the network, we talked about, you know, how sounds are and can be used in a range of different activities that kind of connect people to forests. So that could be through things like mindfulness, forest bathing, forest education and forest school, through forest therapy sessions, but also maybe, you could design forest listening walks to kind of really connect people to the sounds of the forest environment. So that's a bit about the network. As I mentioned, sounds are used in different locations, and this is one I came across in Helsinki Airport in Finland. If you ever pass through that way, look out for this section of the airport, because they've got this big screen and it shows the seasons of the Finnish year. They have quite a number of winter seasons. The sounds that go through that mirror the kind of seasons of the year. It really provides a kind of calming space in quite a stressful, airport busy environment. Then there's Sounds of the Forests. So this is a kind of open source library where people can upload sounds or listen to sounds that other people have uploaded. And they've kind of used it, they've identified some selected artists and asked them to kind of respond to the sounds that have been gathered. And you can see the sounds from different parts of the world. And they asked those people to kind of create music, audio, artwork, and they were presented at the Timber Festival last year, which was somewhere in the Midlands. So our ecotones network, it's now kind of come to an end. We're writing a paper based on, all the kind of discussions and sharing of evidence and the kind of research questions that we were thinking about and that were raised through our kind of network activities. So that is our ecotones, and now I'd like to just move on to talk to a slightly unrelated project. So this is one called Access. It's a 5-year project funded by the ESRC, and it's about kind of advancing capacity for climate and environmental social science. It's led by Patrick Devine-Wright at Exeter University and Birgitte Gatters-Liban at the University of Surrey. So I think they're 2 years in now to the 5-year programme, and Forest Research is involved in the project through something called the Natural Environment Social Research Network, made up of government bodies that have social scientists and are focused on the natural environment, so Natural England, Nature Scotland, Nature Scot, Natural Resources Wales, the Environment Agency, and Forest Research. So the network is facing the challenge that, raising the challenge that in order to tackle climate and environmental crises, we need social sciences. And while we do have excellent social science in this country, there are still kind of problems of things like, sometimes it's fragmented. People might not have the necessary interdisciplinary skills to work with a whole range of natural and other scientists. Sometimes there's a lack of kind of agility to kind of answer quickly some of the kind of policy questions that arise. And we don't always use kind of data sets maybe in the way that we kind of could do to make the most of them. So there's big recognition that technology is important, but it's not going to solve the kind of crises alone. So there is a crucial role for social scientists in things like, understanding behaviours, understanding governance and institutions and how those things can be adapted and changed. And understanding that people are part of a problem and they should be part of the solution as well. So Access is not focused on carrying out research. It's about this building of capacity and making the most of what we have and making that kind of much more obvious to people. So they've got a number of work packages and they want to kind of map and assess and learn from past experiences of social sciences and how that's social science research has brought about change in policy, institutions, businesses, civil society. They also want to empower environmental social scientists, so providing opportunities for learning at different kind of career stages. So they've got master classes, they've got leadership college, and they also want to kind of create new ideas for social sciences to play kind of influential and leading roles in addressing some of the challenges that we face, and champion environmental social sciences scientists, both in the UK, but also internationally. So as I say, it's got a number of work packages, and they're wanting to kind of, get involved in a range of things that are in development at the moment. Some of that's about new toolkits, or pointing people to existing toolkits in a more user-friendly manner. There's training, as I mentioned. They're also doing these sort of what they call agile and timely responses to policy issues. So a couple of things here: a rapid evidence summary on anti-racist action plan in Wales for the Welsh Government, and then also a rapid evidence summary of the DEFRA's 25-year environment plan. There's also quite a strong focus on kind of knowledge exchange and data exchange within Access, thinking about horizon scanning, so working quite strongly with the research councils and thinking about, what is the research needs in the future, and then also thinking about how do we integrate social sciences within other sciences. They've also established a task force. There's one on net zero at the moment. Thanks, Peter. There's one on net zero at the moment, and there's a number of the Access team that's got together, and they're thinking about that in different ways. They're going to be producing a report and a kind of communication plan by sort of spring next year. And then there will be a future task force, which we think at the moment might focus on biodiversity and nature-based solutions. There's also a flex fund within the Access projects. They have an amount of money that they then put out a call for people to bid in for, which often they're wanting, inclusion of third sector organisations, of businesses, civil society as well. And I think there's one due to come out in a couple of weeks. So I'll be showing a link to the Access website. There's a whole range of different people involved, the core leadership team, then there's a wider kind of co-investigator team, and then a sort of policy, civil society, academics, and business. So there's quite, a whole kind of range of people involved. If you're interested, then do sign up to the Access newsletter. They're also wanting to create a kind of expert database where people can think, I need someone who's a expertise in psychology or anthropology, and we'll have a database to kind of identify some of those people. There's also an article in the Climate Journal on Access, and why kind of social science is a fundamental part of helping to solve the climate crisis and conserve our environment. And you can find out a bit more in the website link on this slide. I think the slides will probably be made available. So that's just a bit of a whistle-stop tour through Access. Come to the end of my talk, so thanks very much for listening. If you'd like to find out a bit more of our work in forest research, then do please look at our web link. But I've also included links in other slides to the ecotones website, and also the Access one as well. So thanks very much for listening.